was wiped out, except for one boy. His name was Abdurrahman, and he became known as Abdurrahman I. He was a teenager. The story goes that he and his freedman, Badr, were escaping across the Euphrates from the Abbasid police. He had his little brother with him, and they swam across the Euphrates River, but his little brother couldn't make it. And he watched the Abbasid police slaughter his brother on the opposite side of the river. Because his mother had been a Berber, a North African, he was smuggled across North Africa. Because the Arab tribesmen who had now settled in Spain in vast numbers, in fact, in the settlement of Spain by Arabs, you can find where a given Arab community settled. Arabs from Jordan or Transjordan, for instance, would settle in one Spanish city. Arabs from Syria in another. Arabs from the Medina area in a third city. Cities in Spain became known by the locale from where their Arab tribesmen came from. And these Arab tribesmen brought with them some of the old Arab feuds into Spain. The famous old feud was the Qais-Kalb feud. And this laid the foundation for the struggles between the different Arab cities there and the introduction of the Umayyad dynasty into Spain. When the Abbasids took over in Baghdad, the tribesmen in Spain were totally disaffected. And in 755, this Abdurrahman, now a young man, was introduced into the Arab tribesmen in Spain, and the Umayyad Caliphate resurrected itself in Spain. And the tribesmen rallied to him, and the Caliphate set down its capital at Cordoba. Cordoba is in southern Spain. The great Mosque of Cordoba, as you may know, is a tremendous architectural achievement. It's now the Christian cathedral of Cordoba. In any event, the Umayyads ruled in Spain for another 300 years. So whereas they only ruled in Damascus for 80, they ruled in Spain for 300. And this was the cultural flowering of Islamic civilization in Spain under the Umayyads. Most of their flowering was in this southern area. Quickly review the Reconquista before we get to the movement of the culture from Baghdad into Spain. If you know about the Reconquista, by 1085, the Reconquista that started in northwest Spain had reached half point. Toledo fell, the classical capital of Spain. That was approximately 400 years from the initial Arab jump off into Spain. It took another 400 years before the final episode in the Reconquista, the fall of Granada in 1492. And you know that 1492 is the date of Columbus's voyage to America. So the date of Columbus's voyage to America, which you've no doubt covered in other lectures, coincides with the fall of the last Arab principality in Spain, the Principality of Granada. So you have a tremendous period of time in this Reconquista, but it too coincides with the events culminating in the Columbus episode. Let's go back to Baghdad. The Abbasids, who began what was called the Abbasid Caliphate, now in Baghdad, were known as the flowering of Islamic Arab culture. Under the Abbasids in Baghdad in the 800s, 3 translation centers were in activity supposedly almost constantly. In these translation centers, all the works of classical civilization were rendered into Arabic. And this was going on throughout the 800s and early 900s. Works like Ptolemy's astronomy, Euclid's algebra, or geometry rather. Algebra is even named after the Arab word algebra, and so on. All of the mathematical works, all of the astronomical treatises, all of the medical treatises, all of the philosophical treatises from classical Greece came into Arabic in Baghdad, particularly under the Abbasids. In time, all of this learning and knowledge moved over into Spain, particularly Umayyad Spain, from the 755 period to the late 1000s. So we have a tremendous cultural flowering under Islam, not just in philosophy and science, but also in literature, that many people are just unaware of. And many people are unaware of the fact that it was the Arabs and the Muslims who preserved, in many cases, Western culture. Certainly in the Byzantine Empire and in the Alexandria library previously, some of these works had flourished. But in Christendom as we know it, a lot of this sort of activity and speculation was not encouraged and often discouraged. If it existed at all, it was perhaps in a monastic library someplace, but not used to any extent. Whereas on the Arab side, the Arabs became totally enamored of Aristotle and Plato. They were translated into Arabic and they influenced Arabic thought, so that a whole group of Arab philosophers developed out of this translation activity, first in the Baghdad area, later on in Spain. Now, I could give you some of the names because they are so famous. I'll just run through a couple of the names so you know where this movement went. The first one was called Al-Kindi in the late 700s, Al-Farabi in the 900s. These are Platonic Aristotelian type Arab philosophers who are applying Platonic Aristotelian thought to Islamic religious ideas. In fact, it is the original scholastic synthesis. What you hear of as the scholastic synthesis of humanism in Italy in the 1300s, particularly associated with names like Thomas Aquinas, is not an original activity. Thomas Aquinas' books are basically a simple rehash of Al-Farabi, the Muslim philosopher of the 900s. And if you know Dante's work in the late 12th, early 1300s from Italy, the classical Italian poet, you will know that in his hell he reserved a space for enlightened people. In that enlightened people placed within hell, the inferno, he placed many of these Arab writers and philosophers that he himself had become acquainted with, including someone we're going to hear about momentarily, Averroes. Averroes in Arabic, Ibn Rushd. In any case, the line of philosophers, so you see, in Italy, even in the 1300s, these works were being translated and known and moving from Arabic into Latin, and I'll explain how that happened. So this line of philosophers, going through Al-Farabi, coming up to, in the next generation, Ibn Sina, a Persian philosopher, who wrote medical treatises, philosophical treatises, astronomical treatises, mystical treatises, etc. He's known in the West, because when he was translated, they usually got a different name, as you may have heard of it, Avicenna. Ibn Sina in the West is Avicenna. All these people triggered Western humanism and the Western Renaissance as the translations came into the West. So Ibn Sina in the 1000s, and then finally the one I mentioned, the most famous one of all in the West,